Joining us now to speak on the essence of Benin bronze and artifacts is a multidisciplinary artist, trustee of Legacy Restoration Trust, member of the steering committee of the Benin Dialogue Group, and a visiting fellow of the Cambridge University in the United Kingdom, Enotie Ogbegbo. It's great to have you on the morning show. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, we just had a very insightful conversation about, the essence of the artworks and where it should rightly return to. So just to begin this conversation, would you agree that, it is believed that the moment the federal government takes possession of these artifacts, it's going to be returned to the Oba's palace?
Well, I don't know. I think that question has to be posed to representatives of the federal government. As far as I know, I don't know. I don't know what the discussions between the federal government, what their minds are, apart from what is released publicly. And the last I heard was the federal government minister saying the federal government will take possession of these artifacts. And from what I know, the Constitution empowers the NCMM to determine where artifacts and monuments are kept.
Can you say that again? The Constitution empowers who?
I said that it is within the purview of the National Commission of Museum and Monuments to determine where artifacts within the country which are of national interest are kept.
Absolutely, but you know that the commission is a federal government agency, and the Honourable Minister was clear yesterday, that as a federal government agency, the National Commission for Museums and Monuments will work as a federal agency, but of course will work with the state government and with the palace, who they are in charge of the National Museum, for example. So the expectation will be that when those works return next year, as we hope and pray that they will return, most likely it is the National Commission for Museums and Monuments that will first have to deal with them. So we're asking, is this in tandem with the expectations of the legacy group?
Well, like I said, we are interested solely to support the effort to bring back the artifacts and to help in building a befitting place for it. But the responsibility for the artifacts are not the responsibility of the Legacy Restoration Trust. And the minister has spoken clearly, and the Oba has also spoken clearly, asking the federal government to hold on to the artifacts, and the federal government has said they will receive the artifacts. So the Legacy Restoration Trust is not involved in who possesses or who
keeps them.
Who should keep them.
Okay.
All we're interested in is in supporting the efforts to house them.
That's essential. Now, I've heard so many stories about the Benin bronzes. Like I mentioned earlier, a very significant piece was featured in the movie Black Panther. So we know that these are very prized possessions. Tell us some more about, these bronzes and artifacts and why they are so important to the people of Benin specifically.
Well, let me start by saying that they are so important to the people of Benin City, to the people of Edo, to the people of Nigeria, to the people of West Africa, to the people of Africa, and to all of humanity, because they bear testimony to a civilization which is part of humankind and the human wealth of heritage, the human heritage of culture. Now, these artifacts, the Benin, popularly known as the Benin bronzes, comprise of works made out of bronze, out of brass, out of wood, out of ivory, out of a couple of other materials. Now, these works from the records date from the 16th century and some from the 13th century. So you can imagine in the 13th century, Europe was in the Dark Ages and they were just entering the Renaissance age. And so for these masterpieces to be produced and crafted at that time, That should tell you the height at which our civilization was operating. And so a lot of these works were made for history, to keep records, to keep memories, to keep history. A lot of these artifacts were also made for decorative effects. A lot of them were made as items to be used for traditional worship in the traditional religions and in the traditional altars. A lot of them were also made for utilitarian purposes. And so to take them away is akin to stripping us of our history, of our records, of our archives, dating back centuries. You can imagine something that was produced in 13th century still being available to us all the way to the 19th century, and then they are plundered and kept away for 130 years. So the analogy I like to use is just imagine if in Europe, 130 years ago, the works of Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Sebastian Bach, Shakespeare, all the way to Picasso, Monet, Van Gogh. So from the Renaissance all the way to modern times, if all those works were removed by the 19th century from Europe, all the works of the musicians, of the writers, of the artists, and kept away from Europe for 130 years, definitely the European civilization will not be where it is today. Because as you know, our stories always carry songs. They carry proverbs. They carry all sorts of things. So when you tell a story with an artwork, in seeing that artwork, you recollect the story, and there the songs, the poetry, the proverbs. So when you deny us of all of this, and our successive generations cannot have access to these artifacts and to the stories and the history that they carry, then you can see that we have nothing to build on. They say those who are going to make progress, first of all, have to know where they're coming from in order to know where they're going to. So today, by imposing the Western culture and through colonialism, our people have lost the connection to the roots and to their past, to the rich civilization of their past. And so they cannot build upon that pedestal. And we hope that when these works return, through engaging with them, our people can get a glimpse of their illustrious, the works of their illustrious forebears and the testimony of our civilization. And then to know that today, with the technology and with everything available to us, we can surpass these works and do much better and fashion a better life for our people.
Indeed, Enote, I like the fact that you are stressing, why we need to decolonize the narrative around these, artifacts. The fact that we should take charge because, they belong to us. And yes. I think that it is important that 1,130 of such works are returning from Germany. But of course, let's bear in mind that the expedition of 1897 was by the Brits. I do not know of any British institution so far wanting to return up to that amount, of artifacts to Nigeria. So I think what is happening from Germany should be celebrated. But then what happens to the British? What happens to the Americans, where we still have a lot of bronze heads, scattered all over the world? What happens to the French, etc.? I'm aware the federal government in April received an Ife bronze head from the Netherlands, and I think earlier before then, another one from Mexico. But then what happens to the other ones? Should this example from the Germans serve as the needed impetus for others to begin to speak to us, as colleagues and return what rightly belongs to Nigeria?
Yes, it's very fortuitous that the Germans are leading this effort at this particular juncture, and it's very commendable. We are happy that this is happening at such a fast pace and with a very commendable commitment. But we should also know that in history, the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885 was where the 14 countries met and partitioned Africa, divided Africa up for themselves.
Yes.
In order for you to meet and decide that a whole continent should be divided and exploited, it can only be based on racism. The notion that a race is inferior to one or a race is superior to one. So they must have felt that they were superior and we were inferior for them to take this action, come into our continent, partition it up, and then each country went ahead to use whatever means necessary to massacre and forcefully take over this landmass. And so it's fortuitous that the Germans are leading this effort because it was on their soil that this whole thing began. However, they today come to recognition of the inappropriate ways through which these artifacts were looted or acquired, and have therefore resolved to return them. We hope that the British will follow this very laudable example, but I'm aware that when you are talking about the British museums in the UK, you're talking about museums which belong to the government, like the British Museum.
That's right.
And others. But those which are independent, like the Cambridge University Museum and a couple of other museums around and the Aberdeen Museum, the University of Aberdeen, and a couple of other universities and privately owned museums are making quite an effort. They're reaching out to start discussions on how to vet the provenances of these works and to start a process of negotiating their total unconditional return.
That's essential.
We have also had a lot of inquiries. We have also had a lot of inquiries from America, from museums over there. Most of the museums over there are not under the purview of the government, and so they feel free to act. None of them have been a member of the Benin Dialogue Group, which was the catalyst for all of this. But they have recently reached out to the Benin Dialogue Group to find out how they can be involved in a restitution, the vetting of the provenance of their artifacts in their possession, and how they can return, be involved in a restitution of these items unconditionally too. So we are discussing with a lot of them. When I say we, I mean under the umbrella of the NCMM. Everything is done through the NCMM. And so this is ongoing in the background. A lot of work is ongoing in the background. And a lot of the announcements you hear are as a result of a lot of work which must have gone on in the background before certain agreements are reached. So I'm very optimistic that once the German restitution commences in earnest, and those who are in possession of these artifacts see that it has come to happen, and these artifacts are being handed over and they are kept safely and all of that, this will encourage them to step forward to begin to do the right thing. As you know, the Black Lives Matter movement has helped to pile a lot of pressure additionally on these institutions to return these artifacts because they are the possessions of particular peoples. Mm-hmm. And we hope that with the current mood and with what Arise is doing too, and lots of other news media, the pressure and the awareness will be created so that what was done in a wrong way 130 years ago can be righted somewhat. But I also want to point out that while we are talking about the artifacts, we should be mindful of the fact that a lot of these artifacts have been researched. A lot of knowledge has been gleaned from them by researchers in the last 130 years. And so this forms a formidable archive of knowledge which should not be overlooked.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more with you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a short break. But when we do get back from that break, we're going to talk about the value of this art and the awareness of the general populace and how valuable these artifacts are. We'll be right back on The Morning Show after this. You're welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still with Mr. Enote Egbegbo, and just before we went on that break, we're speaking on the awareness of the general populace this time on the value of some of these artifacts. You know, briefly, how aware are people of how valuable these art pieces are?
Well, I think value is subjective. We have to. So, are you talking about monetary value, or are you talking about the intrinsic value in terms of the knowledge which is stored in these?
Yes, definitely the
artifacts?
intrinsic value, the historical value, you know, of these art pieces. Not just because I don't think they're going to be sold. So I don't think I'm talking on the monetary value here. Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of the intrinsic value, I think people are becoming aware that these artifacts are very important because they are like a repository of knowledge of our history, of our culture, and of our traditions. You see, colonialism brought the Western civilization and their culture and imposed on us through education, through fashion, through the diet, the cuisine, through the language. So all these were superimposed on us. And so we lost effectively a deep connection to our culture, our language, our traditions, and even our diet, our food, our cuisine, and our fashion, and even our architecture. I mean, in all aspects. And so with these works, we are going to come to terms with the fact that we come from a civilization. We're not barbarians. We're not savages. We never lived in trees. We lived in highly organized societies, which were comparable to and even better than some of the cities in Europe. When you talk about the time,
Yes.
600 years ago, 700 years ago. And this is by written accounts of Portuguese travelers, of English travelers in their books, saying how the Benin city was lit night and day. There was a 60-foot lamp that would burn night and day in the palace. So we already had street lamps in the 14th century. In the 15th century, we had street lamps all over the place. And so we had unique architecture. Our architecture and the materials we used enabled us to live in houses where you did not need air conditioning. Everything was cool. It was suited for our weather. We had pots where we could store water at cold temperature. These clay pots will filter the water, make them alkaline, and therefore promote body health. So there are lots of advantages in the knowledge that these artifacts hold. And so when they come back here, people are going to come to terms that we had a rich civilization, we have a rich culture, we have rich traditions, and we have, in every aspect of national life, we had evolved and developed. And so true development or true progress is not the wholesale copying of some other person's culture.
I agree with you.
It is the development of indigenous culture.
You know, I agree with you, and that is one of the facts that is quite interesting about this, is the development of this indigenous culture that is ever so rich. Enote Egbegbo, this has been an interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining us this morning on The Morning Show.
Thank you.